Hello there. So, welcome to our first installment as we begin our journey through the history of theater. Now, theater in one form or another has always existed. It's been around as long as human society, all the way back to primitive man telling the story around the campfire of the hunt that they had just been on. But theater, as we have come to understand it and as we have come to define it in terms of written scripts, character interaction, and whatnot, it begins here with the ancient Greeks. So before we get too far into the plays, the playwrights, and whatnot, what I would like to do is just take a minute and go through some basic information, some things that we need to know to help lay the groundwork for what is going to come next. Remember always, as we go through history and as we go through a lot of these time periods, the study of theater is the study of culture. Okay? If you want to know how a society felt, how they thought about the world around them, you look at their art, you look at their music, their movies, television shows, and their theater. And the Greeks were no exception. Who they were was tied in with the art they created. So we got to understand some basic things about Greek culture before we move on and talk about Greek theater. You know, how did theater come to pass? We're not going to worry about the big history here. I'm not going to take you through how Greece came to be and all of that. That's for your world history classes. I want us to focus on just a couple of major points of Greek society. Number one is that, as I'm sure most of you are aware, the Greeks did not worship one god. They did not have one singular deity that they paid tribute to. Instead, they believed in what we would call a pantheon. That is, a number of gods. Their gods were not benevolent. They were not all-seeing and wise. They were basically like people, just with more power. They also had gods for just about everything. For every conceivable natural phenomenon, there was some god attached to it. A god of love, a god of harvest, a god of the underworld, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And as with any religion, these gods had certain ceremonies and certain things that the followers could do to worship them. In most cases, this would involve things such as an animal sacrifice. But there was one god who had a very different form of celebration in his name, and that is this gentleman. This would be the Greek god Dionysus, as seen in the illustration there from the animated film Fantasia. Dionysus was the Greek god of wine, fertility, and revelry. So basically, he was the god of having a good time. His ceremonies and the things that people would do to honor him upon the festival of Dionysus was basically to have a big party. You could picture it as, a day-long frat party. Everybody would come and everybody would have a lot to drink. There'd be a lot of laughing and whatnot and what have you. But the thing to keep in mind is that Dionysus and his festival was a religious ceremony. So during the day, people would be laughing and partying and having a good time. And then in the evening, they would proceed to one of the very large outdoor theaters, which we'll talk about in more detail a little bit later on, for the religious elements. So please make sure that you have this written down somewhere, and that is Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, fertility, and revelry. So the reason why we're sitting here and having a little conversation about Dionysus is because it is believed that it is at one of the celebrations of Dionysus that theater, as we know it, actually began, and the building blocks were actually starting to come together. And where it began was with a vocabulary word that I want to make sure you all have, and that is the ditharam. A ditharam, as it says on the slide, is a lengthy hymn sung and danced by a group of 50 men. Now, the best way to picture a ditharam, to understand what it was, is for any churchgoers, think about the church choir. They sing the hymn, opens and closes the services. A ditharam serves essentially the same purpose. The only difference is, one, the size. As it says, a ditharam is usually made up of about 50 people, sometimes more. And two, the subject matter. The subject matter of a ditharam would basically be the retelling of a story from Greek history or Greek mythology. So the song would tell the audience a story of some great Greek hero. But here is the thing that you have to understand, is that the story was in the third person. Now what that means is you're telling it saying, so-and-so went here, so-and-so went there, Hercules did this, Hercules did that, Hercules went to the underworld. So very much like if you were telling a bedtime story to a small child, you're telling it in the third person, and that is the same as a ditharam. Singing a long hymn, telling the audience a story of one of the great Greek heroes, but telling it very much in the third person. So the ditharam was one of the essential parts of the religious service in honor of the god Dionysus. Again, a lengthy hymn sung in the third person. Now, the reason we need to make sure we understand that is to understand the next step. Now, before we go on, I want to make sure I'm very clear. What I am telling you is history to the best of our knowledge. As we should know, record keeping from that time was, shady at best. Very little has survived. And for some of the stuff I'm telling you, I've heard conflicting evidence that some of it is not true, or it's been disproven, or there are other facts. I encourage you to go and look up some of these things for yourself and see what is out there. I am simply giving you the information as I have it. Okay, so I think that's important as we go through history. Of course, when record keeping becomes a little bit more reliable and more records survive, there's more we can talk about. But for right now, the information is as we have it. Okay, so with that in mind, continuing on from the ditharam, it is from the ditharam, the chorus of men, that we are finally introduced to whom we believe, or whom history has credited as being the first actual actor. And that would be this gentleman, Thespis. Now, as it says there, the reason that we are talking about Thespis is because he is widely credited as being the first actor. So in the 6th century BC, during a performance of the ditharam, Thespis actually stepped out from the chorus. So as opposed to singing along with all of the other members, he stepped out and delivered a prologue to the audience. And as part of this prologue, it required him to take on the characteristics of the character in the story. So for the very first time, we actually have an actor on stage who is not telling the story from the third person, so-and-so went here, so-and-so went there and did that. He is now saying, I am so-and-so. I am Hercules. I went here. I did this. So for the first time ever, we see a person on stage pretending to be and taking on the characteristics of another person. This is why we credit Thespis as being the first actor. In fact, the term thespian, which is the current term for actors, comes from Thespis. So that is Thespis and how he became known as the first actor. Now, one little sidebar, one little thing, little historical tidbit I really enjoy. The original Greek word for actor was hypocrite, which literally translates into answerer, because that is what the actor does. The chorus would say one thing, and the actor, Thespis, would respond back to them in character. Of course, these days, the term for actor is, of course, actor or thespian, and the word hypocrite has kind of morphed into the word hypocrite, which, as we know, tends to mean a person who says one thing and then does another. So I just think it's kind of telling that one of the first words for actors essentially boils down to liar. All right, so another thing to keep in mind before we move on is that we're condensing history down into, like, the high points. I'm making it sound like some of these things happened boom, 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 one went after the other, and that is not how it went down. It took years and years and years for us to move from, the Ditharam to Thespis to the festival of Dionysus becoming what we would call the city Dionysus, and for theater to become one of the focal points of that celebration. So just keep in mind, because we're about to take a big leap forward with our next video, when we start talking about the actual city Dionysus, the types of plays that were being presented, and the elements of those plays. But for now, 3 things I want you to make sure you take away from this video, okay? Number 1, Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, revelry, fertility, and eventually the Greek god of theater. Okay. Number 2, the Ditharam, the lengthy hymn sung and danced by a chorus of 50 men. And number 3, Thespis, the man credited as being the first actor. So please, please, please make sure that you have those 3 terms written down, notated somewhere, because you are going to need that information going forward. Also, please always make sure that you check the descriptions of these videos. I will always try to include additional material that I can find in the description. So always look down there and see what's down there. Sometimes nothing, but I always try to include a little something. So when we come back next time, we are going to talk about the city Dionysus as it became. We're going to talk about the plays themselves, or the type of plays. So, until next time.